The jig is up, Elizabeth. Everyone needs to know what a fraud you are.
My daughter just ordered me to scrub the toilets in her bridal suite while I stood there in a janitor's mask at her high society wedding. She thinks I'm just the help she hired to keep the floors shiny for her senator husband's family. She has no idea I just overheard her bragging about forging my signature to steal my house and my business. She wanted an invisible father? Fine. But soon, I'm going to make sure the only thing people remember about this wedding is the moment the lights went out and the truth came out. I am 62 years old, and my hands are a map of 40 years of manual labor. They are calloused, scarred, and permanently stained with the faint scent of industrial ammonia and pine cleaner. I spent every waking hour building a small but successful cleaning empire from a single bucket and a mop. I did it all for Lily. I wanted her to have the life I never had. I paid for the elite art schools, the European trips, and the designer clothes that made her feel like she belonged in a world of silver spoons. Before we continue with how I ended up scrubbing floors at my own daughter's wedding, if you enjoy stories of justice and unexpected twists, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps us share more stories like this one with you every day. The betrayal didn't start today. It started 6 months ago, when Lily got engaged to Marcus, the son of a prominent senator. She didn't call me with joy. She called me with a script. She said, her voice cold and rehearsed. It felt like a physical blow to the chest, but I loved her too much to argue. I agreed to be the ghost father. But then, a week ago, she called with a quote 3. She asked my company to provide the janitorial staff for the wedding venue. She said she wanted more than strangers, but the condition was cruel. I had to be there to manage the crew, and I had to wear a full face mask and a heavy uniform so no one would recognize me. I accepted, thinking I just wanted to see my little girl walk down the aisle, even from the shadows. I was wrong. I wasn't there to be a guest. I was there to be her secret servant. The morning of the wedding was a blur of expensive floral arrangements and the frantic shouting of event coordinators. I arrived at the estate at 5 a.m., leading my team of 4 men. We weren't there to celebrate. We were there to make sure not a single smudge appeared on the marble floors. I pulled the heavy, breathable mesh mask over my face and adjusted my gray coveralls. My heart felt like lead. Through the eye slits of the mask, I watched the woman I raised move like a stranger in a world of pure gold. Lily looked breathtaking. Her dress cost more than my first 3 service vans combined. I stood in the corner of the grand foyer, leaning on a mop, watching her direct the caterers with a sharp, arrogant tone I didn't recognize. When she caught my eye, she didn't smile. She didn't offer a secret wave. She walked over, her silk train rustling, and hissed under her breath so the nearby guests wouldn't hear. "The men's room near the bar needs attention, Henry. Do your job and stay out of the sightlines of the photographer. And for heaven's sake, don't let anyone see your hands." I did exactly what she asked. I retreated into the shadows of the mansion, cleaning up spilled champagne and discarded hors d'oeuvres. The humiliation was a slow-burning fire in my gut. Every time a guest looked through me as if I were a piece of furniture, the fire grew. I watched Marcus, her fiancé, laughing with his father, the senator. They were talking about quote 6 and quote 7, completely unaware that the man cleaning their footprints off the floor was the source of Lily's supposed wealth. The tension reached a breaking point when I was summoned to the bridal suite to clear out some trash. I thought the room was empty. I slipped in quietly, my rubber soles silent on the plush carpet. But then I heard voices from the balcony. Lily was talking to her future mother-in-law. I froze behind a heavy velvet curtain, my breath hitching in my throat. I wasn't just a secret anymore. I was a target in a game I didn't even know she was playing. I stayed frozen behind the curtain, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. On the balcony, Lily's voice sounded different, sharper, more calculating. She was talking to Marcus's mother, Eleanor, a woman who looked like she was carved out of ice and old money. Eleanor was questioning Lily about the quote that her father, the famous professor, had supposedly set up for her. Lily lied, her voice as smooth as glass. I felt a cold chill wash over me. 5 million? I didn't have 5 million in cash. I had a successful business, a debt-free home, and a retirement fund I'd spent 40 years building, but nothing close to what she was claiming. Then came the part that broke me. Eleanor leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. And the guarantees for the new development project? The senator needs to be sure the collateral is solid before we announce the partnership. Lily didn't even flinch. My head spun. She wasn't just lying about who I was. She was stealing everything I owned. I realized then why she wanted me there in a mask. She needed me close enough to keep the staff in line, but hidden enough so I wouldn't hear the web of fraud she was spinning. She had forged my signature on documents that would effectively hand over my life's work to the senator's family the moment she said. I waited until they left the room before I crept out. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my cleaning rag. I looked at my reflection in the gilded mirror, a faceless man in a gray jumpsuit. I wasn't her father to her. I was a piggy bank she was ready to smash. I slipped into a small supply closet down the hall. The smell of bleach and old mops usually a comfort to me, but now it felt like a coffin. I pulled my phone from my pocket with trembling fingers. I needed to see it for myself. I logged into my business portal and my private bank app. My stomach dropped. There were pending notifications for authorized document signatures and a series of strange transfers initiated just hours ago. She had used my tablet at home a few weeks ago, claiming she needed to finish some art portfolios. Instead, she must have scanned my biometrics or used my saved passwords to digitalize my signature. She was literally dismantling my life while I was outside the door, waiting to pick up her discarded champagne glasses. The audacity of it was paralyzing. She had gambled my house, the roof over my head, to buy her way into a family that would never truly accept her. The ceremony was starting. The music, a grand orchestral piece, began to swell through the mansion's vents. I had to go back out. I had to play the part of the invisible servant for just a little longer. As I walked back toward the grand ballroom, I passed a line of expensive cars. I saw Lily through a glass partition, standing with Marcus. He looked at her with a mix of pride and greed. He didn't love her. He loved the quote 16 and the quote 17 she brought to the marriage. I stood at the back of the room, tucked behind a massive floral arrangement. The senator stood at the altar, beaming with a predatory kind of joy. He was a man who traded in favors and power, and he thought he had just landed a massive fish from a quote 18 in Egypt. I watched as Lily began her walk down the aisle. She looked like an angel, but all I could see was the devil in the details. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold plastic of my business credit card. I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to stop the wedding yet. I was going to let her climb to the very top of her mountain of lies before I pushed her off. As the vows were exchanged, I retreated to the small office near the kitchen. I wasn't cleaning anymore. I was a man on a mission. I called my lawyer, Frank, who had been my friend for 30 years. It was late, but he picked up on the second ring. He said. I told him everything. I told him about the forged signatures, the collateral for the senator's development project, and the fake offshore accounts. Frank whispered, his voice sharp with professional focus. I looked through the cracked door at the grand ballroom, where the wedding party was now cheering. I saw Lily laughing, tossing her head back, acting like a queen who had just conquered a kingdom built on my bones. I said, my voice as cold as the marble floors. I hung up and felt a strange sense of calm. For decades, I had been the man who cleaned up after people, the one who made sure the world was spotless for everyone else. I had spent my life making things right, but today, I was going to let things get very, very messy. I walked back into the kitchen. The head chef was barking orders, preparing the main course, Wagyu beef and lobster. Each plate cost more than I used to make in a week. I looked at my crew, the men who had worked beside me for years. They looked exhausted, sweating under their masks, being treated like ghosts by the socialites outside. I leaned in and whispered to my lead supervisor, quote, 24. The atmosphere in the ballroom was reaching its peak. The wedding dinner was about to be served, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and arrogance. I watched from the shadows as the senator stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass. The clinking sound cut through the chatter like a knife. The senator began, his voice booming with practiced charisma. Lily beamed at him, her face glowing with triumph. She looked like she had finally achieved the status she craved. She didn't notice me standing near the buffet line, clutching a dirty rag. She didn't see the text message I had just received from Frank. Quote, 27. Quote. The senator continued, quote, 28. Quote. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my chest. A man of honor? I was a man of soap and water. I was the man who scrubbed the grease off their vents so their fancy dinner wouldn't smell like a burger joint. The irony was suffocating. I looked at the kitchen doors. My crew was already slipping out the back, heading to the vans. The caterers were starting to look confused. Their payment terminals were flashing declined. The high-end audio technicians were whispering into their headsets. The luxury that surrounded these people was held together by my money, and I had just pulled the thread. Lily looked toward the kitchen, her brow furrowed. She saw me standing there, the only janitor left in the room. She signaled me with a sharp, dismissive flick of her wrist, pointing toward a spilled drink on the far side of the room. She still thought I was her puppet. She had no idea the strings were already cut. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. The senator was still standing, holding his glass high, waiting for the applause to die down so he could finish his grand speech about family values and strategic partnerships. Lily sat there like a porcelain doll, smiling at the crowd, her eyes shining with the reflected light of the crystal chandeliers. She was finally the girl she had always dreamed of being, the daughter of a wealthy scholar, the bride of a political dynasty. I didn't move toward the spill she had pointed out. Instead, I walked slowly toward the center of the dance floor. I moved with a deliberate pace, my heavy boots thumping against the polished wood. The music began to falter. The band leader looked over at the sound technician, who was frantically pressing buttons. My lawyer had done his job well. The digital payment for the entertainment had been clawed back, and the service providers were shutting down one by one. As I reached the middle of the floor, a few guests began to whisper. They saw a man in a gray jumpsuit and a mask standing right where the first dance was supposed to happen. I could see Lily's face change from triumph to pure terror. She knew. She didn't know exactly what I was doing, but she knew her invisible father was no longer playing by the rules. She half rose from her seat, her hand gripping the white lace of the tablecloth so hard her knuckles turned white. "Sir, what are you doing?" Marcus hissed, stepping forward from the head table. He looked annoyed, like he was dealing with a broken appliance. "This isn't the time for maintenance. Get back to the kitchen, or you're fired." I didn't answer him. I looked directly at Lily. Through the mesh of my mask, our eyes met. I saw the girl I had stayed up with when she had the flu, the girl I had worked 3 jobs for, and the woman who had just tried to sell my soul for a seat at a table that didn't want her. The senator cleared his throat, his face turning a shade of angry red. "Is there a problem with the staff?" he barked into the microphone. "The only problem, Senator," I said, my voice muffled but steady through the mask, "is that you've been toasted with lies all night, and the bill for those lies just came due." The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the distant clinking of plates in a kitchen that was rapidly emptying. Marcus took another step toward me, his face twisted in a snarl. "What did you just say?" "Security! Get this lunatic out of here!" But security didn't come. My lawyer had already contacted the venue's management, informing them of the identity theft and the fraudulent credit card used to book the event. The guards were currently busy speaking with the police at the front gate. Lily was shaking now. She knew the voice. She knew the man behind the mask. She tried to speak, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. I reached up with my calloused, dirty hand, the hand she told me to hide, and grabbed the edge of the mask. With one slow, deliberate motion, I pulled it off. A gasp rippled through the room. I stood there, 62 years old, gray-haired, and smelling of the cleaning chemicals that had built Lily's life. I didn't look like a professor from Oxford. I looked like a man who knew how to work, and I looked like a man who had been pushed too far. The senator stammered, looking between me and the terrified bride. I said, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. Lily finally found her voice, but it was a pathetic, high-pitched scream. I said, looking her dead in the eye. The climax hit the room like a tidal wave. The senator's face turned from a bright red to a ghostly, sickly white. He looked at the documents I pulled from my jumpsuit pocket, the copies of the forged deeds Lily had tried to use as collateral for their family's business. I announced, my voice booming through the speakers. Lily collapsed into her chair, her expensive white veil catching on a silver platter, sending glass shattering across the floor. She sobbed, but the guests weren't looking at her with pity. They were backing away, whispering as if her disgrace were contagious. Marcus looked at her not with love, but with pure, unadulterated disgust. He realized the millions were a fantasy, and his family's reputation was being dragged through the mud in real time. I said, stepping closer to the head table. As if on cue, the grand chandeliers flickered and died. The professional lighting rigs went dark, leaving the room illuminated only by the faint emergency exit signs. The music had already stopped, but now the air conditioning cut out, and the silence was deafening. I looked at the senator's wife, who was clutching her pearls in the dark. I said into the shadows. I turned my back on her cries and walked toward the exit. I didn't look back as the sound of Marcus's family shouting at Lily filled the empty, dark hall. For the first time in 40 years, the weight was off my shoulders. I was finally clean. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. Lily tried to come home that night, but I had already called a locksmith. When she pounded on the door, screaming about how I had ruined her life and her chance at true happiness, I didn't feel the old urge to fix things for her. I realized that for 24 years, I hadn't been raising a daughter. I had been enabling a stranger. The senator's family filed for an annulment the very next morning, and the legal battle over the forged documents began. I didn't drop the charges. Actions have consequences, and she needed to learn that lesson away from my shadow. I sold my cleaning company 6 months later, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I was tired. A large national firm bought it for a price that ensured I would never have to touch a mop again. I used a significant portion of that money to set up a vocational scholarship for kids from working-class backgrounds, real kids who aren't afraid of a little dirt under their fingernails. Today, I live in a small house by the coast. I travel, I read, and I finally have the time to pursue my own interests, which, ironically, include a bit of amateur archaeology. I don't wear a mask anymore. I look at my calloused hands, and I'm proud of them. They built a life, they protected a legacy, and they were strong enough to let go when they had to. Lily is working a retail job now, paying off the debts she accumulated. We don't speak, but I hope that one day, when she looks in the mirror, she sees the person she really is, not the person she tried to pretend to be. I finally found peace, not in the luxury she wanted, but in the honesty I always had. Looking back at everything, I have to ask, did I do the right thing? Or was I too harsh on my own flesh and blood? What would you have done if you found out your child was erasing your existence for a seat at a table that didn't belong to them? If you enjoyed this journey of justice and transformation, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of real-life drama and ultimate revenge. The end. Thank you for listening.